Thank you, Madam Speaker. Indeed, I was speaking a little earlier about how we seem to hop from self-made crisis to self-made crisis in this chamber, in this capital, in this town, whether it's by legislative action, executive action, bureaucratic action. And what the American people are suffering, most of it is government caused. It really isn't a condition of weather or nature, or even so much our adversaries around the world. Those are all factors, and they all can be factors. But they pale in compared to what...
The chair will receive a message.
Madam Speaker, a message from the President of the United States.
Madam Speaker.
Madam Secretary.
President of the United States to deliver to the House of Representatives a message in writing.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
Crises that are indeed caused by actions of government. Here in Washington, D.C., in my home state, so many of them right there in Sacramento. We're talking energy, we're talking fiscal, we're talking a business climate that is hampered by unreasonable regulations. We're talking about things as simple as women and girls sports. You know, why should that be complicated? Yet it is. And the one that faces, the one that's probably the most difficult and the greatest existential threat right now to our country immediately is the border problem. This porous border that has been made that way pretty much since day 2 of the Biden administration. Now, it certainly wasn't perfect before that, but my hat's off to President Trump for his term trying as much as he can to do something about it, with building the wall, continuing to build the wall, repair old sections of the wall, but he met resistance just about every step of the way. Indeed, that infrastructure makes it so much easier and simpler for our border personnel to be able to track who's coming across the border and basically funnel them to the areas where border entry can be properly processed with a plan in place, with rules in place, with laws in place that would make that expedient and actually beneficial to our country, and also less harmful to those that would wish to come here, to immigrate here, to seek jobs, to seek citizenship, what have you. And in an orderly society, we need to have control of the border and invite people to come be part of what this country has to offer. That's what immigration used to be many decades ago. It slipped away from us. So we hear all day long, oh, the immigration system is broken. Well, it's broken because it's not being enforced. Now, we could add to the laws that we have on the books there and refine them, such as the interpretation of asylum is wide open these days. Asylum used to be more reserved for people that are being subject to abuse by a regime in a country they live in. They would be subject to much persecution, religious persecution, political persecution, what have you. We understand that. We saw that in World War II and pre-World War II in Europe with what happened to the Jews there. The United States didn't act quickly enough in that situation. But at least we understand what asylum should look like. What we have now is basically people presenting themselves at the border, if they're not just sneaking right past, as saying a few magic words to the personnel, and then they're taken into custody temporarily, given a number and maybe even a fictitious name, and allowed to move on through. I've been to that border. I've witnessed what that looks like. Indeed, we have buses going back and forth patrolling the border, not to keep the border closed or enforced, but picking people up so they can sooner get them to processing centers. We're paying for that. It's like a giant welcome wagon that's been turned into such by this Biden administration. Now, President Trump, as I said, tried really hard to get a handle on this, and improvements were made with several hundred miles of new, strong border fence and repaired old fence. And also the border personnel that felt like, yes, we appreciate you, appreciate your jobs, we appreciate the effort you're making. Nowadays, I think they're just completely overwhelmed. And I can't imagine the morale is very good when they're basically told that they're to be part of running the welcome wagon and just let people in, where you hear anecdotes about them welding the gates open, where they're actually in Texas. I mean, are you kidding me? The state of Texas, through their own National Guard, has been making efforts to control parts of their border. They're putting up wire and other measures that will help control some distance on their border. And you have the Biden administration threatening them and bringing lawsuits against them, and who knows, maybe even a confrontation with federal troops versus Texas National Guard at some point, in order for the federal government to be tearing down the barrier in order to preserve our border and have some semblance of order instead of the chaos that's been introduced and exacerbated by the Biden administration. How does this make a lick of sense to anybody? They would tear down the barrier that indeed the federal government should have built up to begin with. Now, let's talk about the barrier itself a little bit. We're not a country that's going to completely close it off. We welcome legal immigration. Shouldn't have to say that. It's always been who we are. Legal immigration, one that goes through process, one that our own people, our own government decides how many people do we want to have enter under the different programs, under the different categories. How many should we have this year apply for citizenship? And that number is way up from what it was 5-6 decades ago, where if I believe the stats are somewhere around 800 or 900,000 new immigrants, legal immigrants, new citizens per year, as I think I have it, where the number might have been about 200,000 back 50, 60 years ago. So it's a dramatic increase of us welcoming legal citizens over that time. Others that would apply for work permits, education visas, travel visas, different categories. All we ask is that you follow a set of rules. Go through a process. That's not unreasonable. I always liken it to, when you leave your home, most likely you probably lock your doors on your house, maybe even set an alarm, maybe have a fence around your house, your property. Is it because you hate your neighbor? Is it because you hate somebody else that might come by? No, it's because it's your security, it's your responsibility. There's people that are going to be led into temptation. Look how many packages get stolen off front porches because, the deliverer just leaves it there, and I guess that's the agreement. That's rampant these days. What if that door was unlocked? The same people that are bold enough to steal packages off your front porch wouldn't have any hesitation to go on inside and clean you out as well. Look what they're doing to retail stores while clerks and employees helplessly watch them cart off phones and watches and whatever other merchandise they can get while their corporate edict is that don't dare talk to them, don't follow them with the camera, don't go get their license plate. Heaven knows you wouldn't want to try and detain them anyway, as we see more and more of the corporate world become spineless in controlling the chaos. And so we see this affecting mostly our very large cities, which politically tend to be the blue cities, Democrat-controlled mayors and city councils and supervisors like that. They have chaos like hasn't been ever seen in this country when you talk about crisis. Part of this is soft on crime, part of it is soft on border, soft on what they call immigration. This isn't immigration, it's an invasion. Immigration would imply that there is a legal process to it. And again, we still welcome legal immigration to this country. We always have. And that's the part that gets caught up in the blatant misinformation placed out there. Because Republicans want to have order. They want to have something that will preserve the sovereignty of this country and preserve all the infrastructure within it. I mean, when you look at the cities here, take New York City, where they're filling up community centers and schoolrooms and gyms and national parks. They use this term migrants. A migrant is a euphemism. This is an illegal immigrant invasion. And they're getting angry because people are busing them in from Texas, Florida, wherever else, because they're overloaded. The border states, California I represent a part of is one of those border states, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas. But truly it ends up pretty much all of our states, in effect, are border states, because you have the Biden administration flying these folks around the country and placing them wherever they see fit. So it's interesting to see they squawk about maybe the governor of Texas and Florida and some others busing them to their city where they proclaim, we're a sanctuary city. We welcome you. We want you to come in. As the governor of New York and the mayor of New York City have claimed in the past and then are backtracking on now, because the numbers have finally caught up to them, even though they've been warned and warned and warned by those of us that can see what that's going to look like. Why do we put in place people that allow a system like this to happen? To foster a system that is so indeed broken as it is. We have the laws, we have the rules, and we even passed in this House a good piece of legislation, H.R. 2, to refine those rules. So you hear people saying like, oh, you Republicans, you're full of hooey on that because you say on one hand, enforce the laws you have, on the other, why do you want this new law to come in? Well, because they're not doing the job. Asylum needs to be refined, it looks like. Now, if you had a different administration that was on the side of the American people, not on the side of enforcing the law, you could probably interpret asylum as what it was originally intended, for those that indeed are facing crisis due to an oppressive government. But no, it's been interpreted to be just pretty much a wide open. Our border's a sieve, and when I visited the border, you see, people coming through a coyote process. They're paying people big money, otherwise their lives might be harmed by the coyote system they have down there, the cartels. But I saw pretty nice people coming across, families and such like that. These aren't bad people at heart, they're breaking the law. But when you leave a great big green light there saying, come on in, I guess I can't blame them. But the people you're talking about aren't necessarily persecuted by a government in such fashion, but more they're seeking economic opportunity. 9 out of 10 or more are seeking economic opportunities, seeking jobs, seeking the promise. And you hear the Democrats, you hear people in the media saying, well, all they want is to come seek a better life. Well, sure. But the life of this country, the lives of the citizens already here, those that came here legally, came here properly, and those that are been here, born here as citizens, they're paying the freight on all this. Because you're bringing folks in that haven't been brought up in the American way, haven't been educated in our ways, probably don't speak the language in many, many cases, may not even have a skill to bring so that they can self-sustain themselves and their family. It'll be maybe in low-skilled labor that probably won't pay their own way. That's chaotic, and that is not how our immigration system used to work. 100 years ago, however many decades ago, you had to offer something that's going to strengthen our country to be an immigrant here. Now, we'll hear, oh, that's so closed-minded, it's so oppressive, it's so hateful, because that's the only play they have. They keep going to the well on that. We'll call it xenophobia or racism or whatever. No. The greatness of this country is in its process, in its constitution, in its stability, and people that respect that and uphold the Constitution, uphold the laws. And the lawlessness we're seeing at the border, as untold numbers are coming across daily. I'm glad to see this idea that was coming from the Senate on an immigration bill has pretty much lost any momentum, because at a minimum, according to the pieces I'm reading on it, 5,000 people would be allowed across the border per day before they take an action on it. Now, if you're, let's say you're a retailer, all right, you're seeing all these, the break-ins and the rip-offs and the looting going on. What if you had a rule in your city that says we have to let 5 thieves in per day to your retail center, and they can fill up their bags as much as they want. But on the 6th one, we'll go ahead and start enforcing on that. We'll call the police, we'll detain, whatever. What kind of crazy idea is that? As well as so many other holes that were in this package. The first place we start, enforce the border, finish building the fence so that our border personnel are not so overwhelmed, and put them back to their real jobs of not just processing people as fast as they can and turning them loose in our country with maybe they'll come show up for an asylum hearing in 8 or 10 years and become so entrenched in the country illegally that you can't find them, you can't deport them if you wanted to. That's part of it. That's part of the chaos that's being fostered. So where I represent in California, which indeed is a border state, I represent the north end of it, which is about 600 miles from the border itself. But what we see, the secondary effects of illegal immigration, it keeps growing. And when I say grow, it is literal, because what we have in part of my district and some of the Southern Cal districts as well is a proliferation of illegal marijuana grows. Many, many acres of them. Hundreds of greenhouses that our rural counties are just overwhelmed trying to deal with. And a passive response by Department of Justice and the drug enforcement agencies and the Biden administration and our own California administration, led by Governor Newsom with soft on crime policies. This changes the landscape of a rural community, having all these marijuana grows and the cartels and all the filth that comes with that. The environmental damage, the people that are abused, sometimes even slave labor involved with people captive out there because nobody knows who they are, where they are, let alone having a permit to build these facilities or take the water from somewhere else in order to do these marijuana grows. Of today's marijuana, which is a much more powerful product, and brings with it the whole litany of gang activity as this product is moved up and down in my area, say Interstate 5, but all over the West, all over the country even. So illegal immigration has a lot of side effects. There are marijuana proliferation, as I mentioned. Of course, the fentanyl is coming across the border and infecting and destroying so many lives. And it goes on and on and on because this administration and our own governor in California, that administration, continue to foster this lawlessness, soft on crime, soft on border policy that is doing us so much damage and is probably the biggest problem we face, along with our massive deficit and the crunch that's coming from that. So to talk more about that, my colleague, who I greatly respect and has done so much work on this area on the border, I'd like to turn it over to Glenn Grothman, who's, again, been very diligent on putting this out in front of the people and pointing out what a crisis this is to our country and its existence.